I never thought a utility trailer full of road salt would become the catalyst for the biggest legal battle my subdivision had ever seen. But when I woke up on that frozen January morning in Columbus, Ohio, to find my trailer gone, I knew the HOA had finally crossed a line they couldn't uncross. My name is Zachary Lawson, and I'd been living in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision for 5 years. I'd always been the guy who helped out during emergencies. When Mrs. Henderson's basement flooded, I was there with a pump. When the Rodriguez family needed help moving furniture, I showed up with my truck. And every winter, I took it upon myself to salt the private roads in our development when the city crews couldn't get to us fast enough. The HOA never complained about that, not once, until Nancy Whitmore became the president. Nancy was exactly what you'd picture when someone said the words HOA president with an attitude problem. She was 47, always wore her blonde hair in a severe bob, and had a collection of pastel cardigans that she rotated through like uniforms. She drove a white Lexus SUV with a custom license plate that read Rules 1 cent, and had made it her personal mission to make everyone's life in Meadowbrook Estates as regulated as humanly possible. The morning everything went sideways was January 15th. I'd checked the weather forecast the night before and knew we were in for a rough week. A polar vortex was descending on Ohio, bringing with it temperatures that would drop below zero and a series of winter storms that meteorologists were already calling historic. I'd spent the previous afternoon loading my utility trailer with 50 bags of road salt, each weighing 40 pounds. That's 2,000 pounds of salt, and it cost me nearly $400 out of my own pocket. I'd been doing this every winter since I moved in, and the neighbors always thanked me for it. Our private roads weren't city-maintained, and the HOA had never contracted with a snow removal service despite our annual dues being $1,200 per household. I walked outside at 6 in the morning, my breath visible in the bitter air, planning to hook up the trailer to my Ford F-250 and start salting before the next wave of freezing rain hit around noon. The trailer was gone. At first, I thought maybe I'd sleepwalked through parking it somewhere else, but that made no sense. I'd parked it right next to my truck in my own driveway. There were no tire marks, no signs of theft. I pulled out my phone and called the non-emergency police line. Officer Martinez arrived within 20 minutes, which was impressive considering the road conditions. He was a stocky guy in his mid-30s who looked like he'd already dealt with too many fender benders that morning. "So your trailer just disappeared?" he asked, looking at the empty spot in my driveway. 2,000 pounds of road salt and a 15-foot utility trailer, I said. "I parked it right here last night around 7, checked on it before bed at 11. This morning, gone." He walked around, examining the driveway and street. "No signs of forced entry into your property. You have any cameras?" "Just the doorbell camera, but it faces the front door, not this side of the driveway." Officer Martinez was writing in his notebook when my neighbor, Tom Berkshire, came jogging over. Tom was retired military, 70 years old, and still ran 5 miles every morning despite the weather. "Zach, you looking for your trailer?" Tom asked, barely winded. "You saw what happened?" "Damn right I did. Woke me up around midnight. Tow truck came, hooked it up, and drove off." "I figured you'd arranged it for some reason." Officer Martinez perked up. "Did you see what company?" "Valley Towing," Tom said. "Had it written right on the side, big white letters." "Nobody called for a tow," I said, feeling my jaw tighten. "Why would someone steal a trailer full of salt?" "Let me make some calls," Officer Martinez said. While he talked on his radio, I stood there feeling my hands getting numb despite my insulated gloves. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees, and the wind chill made it feel like zero. The sky was that particular shade of gray that promised more snow. Officer Martinez came back looking confused. Valley Towing says they got a call from your HOA to remove a commercial vehicle that was in violation of subdivision covenants. They have a work order and everything. A commercial vehicle. It's a utility trailer. I'm not running a business. I'm trying to salt the roads so nobody breaks their neck. You might want to talk to your HOA, Martinez said. Technically, if they requested the tow and Valley Towing had proper authorization, this isn't theft. It's a civil matter. Where's my trailer now? Their impound lot off Route 33. I thanked Officer Martinez and immediately got in my truck. Tom climbed in with me without asking, which I appreciated. The drive to Valley Towing took 40 minutes in the deteriorating conditions. By the time we arrived, freezing rain had started coating everything in a layer of ice. The impound lot was surrounded by chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A small office trailer sat near the entrance, exhaust pouring from a vent as someone ran a space heater inside. I pushed through the door to find a woman in her 50s sitting behind a desk covered in paperwork and coffee stains. "Help you?" she asked without looking up. "You towed my trailer last night. I'm here to get it back." "Name, Zachary Lawson." She typed on her computer with 2 fingers. "Yeah, got it. 15-foot utility trailer. That'll be $350. $350. I didn't authorize this tow. My HOA called you illegally. Says here it was a covenant violation. If you got a dispute with your HOA, that's between you and them. But the tow was legal. We got the authorization in writing, and you want your trailer. It's $350, plus $50 for each additional day it stays here. This is insane. That trailer is full of road salt that I need to treat the roads in my subdivision." "Not my problem, sir. You want to file a complaint? Here's our customer service number." She slid a business card across the desk. Tom put his hand on my shoulder, probably sensing I was about to say something I'd regret. "Let's just pay it and deal with the HOA later." I didn't have much choice. I handed over my credit card and tried not to think about the fact that I was now out $750, $400 for the salt, and $350 for the tow, for trying to help my neighbors. By the time we got the trailer hooked up and drove back to Meadowbrook Estates, it was almost 10 in the morning. The freezing rain had intensified, and I could already see the roads in our subdivision turning into ice rinks. I drove carefully through the entrance, planning to start salting immediately. That's when I saw Nancy's white Lexus blocking the road near the community mailboxes. She was standing outside it, wrapped in a cream-colored wool coat, holding up her hand like a traffic cop. I stopped the truck and rolled down the window. "Nancy, I need to get through. I need to salt these roads before someone gets hurt. You need to remove that trailer from the subdivision immediately," she said, her voice sharp. "Commercial vehicles are not permitted per Section 8, Paragraph 3 of our covenants. It's not a commercial vehicle. It's my personal utility trailer. A trailer loaded with commercial quantities of road salt constitutes commercial use. I sent you a violation notice via email last night." "I never got any email. I sent it to the address on file. Regardless, you were notified and the trailer has been removed once. If you bring it back into the subdivision, I'll have it towed again." Tom leaned over from the passenger seat. "Nancy, for crying out loud, the man is trying to help. Look at these roads. The HOA has not authorized any private snow removal operations. If residents want the roads treated, they can submit a formal request at the next board meeting, and we'll discuss contracting with a professional service." "The next board meeting isn't for 3 weeks," I said. This storm system is going to last at least 2 weeks according to the Weather Service. Then residents will need to drive carefully. Nancy walked back to her Lexus, got in, and drove off, though I noticed she struggled to get traction on the icy hill near her house. I sat there with the truck idling, watching her taillights disappear. Tom whistled low. She's really going to die on this hill, isn't she? Apparently. So what are you going to do? I thought about it. The salt was already purchased. My neighbors needed safe roads. And Nancy had just made this personal. I'm going to salt the roads. Even if she calls the tow truck again. I'll park the trailer on the street outside the subdivision. Public road, she's got no jurisdiction there. I'll load salt into the truck bed and spread it that way. She can't tow my truck. That's what I did. I drove the trailer to a spot on Riverside Drive, just outside the subdivision entrance, and backed it onto the shoulder. Then I spent the next 3 hours shoveling salt into my truck bed and spreading it throughout Meadowbrook Estates. My shoulders ached, my hands were frozen, and I went through about 10 bags, but at least the main roads were passable. By the time I finished, it was mid-afternoon and the temperature had dropped to 10 degrees. I drove home and found a notice zip tied to my mailbox. It was printed on HOA letterhead. Violation notice. Unauthorized spreading of foreign substances on community roads. Fine, $500. Cease and desist all unauthorized maintenance activities immediately. I crumpled the paper and threw it in the truck. I was now out over $1,200, and apparently, I was the bad guy for trying to keep people safe. The next morning, the temperature didn't get above 5 degrees. The Weather Service issued warnings about the polar vortex settling in for an extended period. More freezing rain fell overnight, and without continued salt application, Meadowbrook Estates had turned into a skating rink. I got 3 calls before 9 in the morning. The first was from Mrs. Chen, who'd fallen walking to her car and thought she might have sprained her wrist. The second was from David Park, whose wife had slid through a stop sign inside the subdivision and crashed into a mailbox cluster, causing about $5,000 in damage to her Subaru. The third was from Tom, who'd watched a delivery truck slide backwards down the hill on Maple Court. "People are getting hurt," Tom said. "Someone needs to do something." I tried. I got fined $500. "Then we need to fight this. Come to the community meeting tonight." I hadn't heard about any community meeting. Apparently, word had spread through the neighborhood about the situation, and Tom had organized an emergency gathering at the clubhouse for 7 that evening. I showed up at 6:45. The clubhouse was a modest building near the playground, mostly used for birthday parties and the occasional HOA meeting. By the time 7 rolled around, at least 60 people had crammed inside, which was nearly half the subdivision. Nancy arrived precisely at 7 with her HOA board. Besides her, there was Richard Stokes, the treasurer, a nervous-looking accountant in his 60s, and Patricia Donovan, the secretary, who was equally nervous and kept glancing at Nancy like she was waiting for permission to breathe. "This is not an official HOA meeting," Nancy announced, standing at the front of the room. "No votes can be taken, no official business can be conducted." "That's fine," Tom said, standing up. "This is a community discussion. Nancy, people are getting hurt. The roads are dangerous. Zach has been salting them every winter at his own expense, and now you've not only stopped him but fined him for trying to help. What's your plan for dealing with this weather? The HOA will contract with a professional service when budget allows." When budget allows. David Park stood up, his voice angry. "My insurance deductible is $1,000 because my wife crashed due to ice on roads that Zach could have prevented. When exactly will the budget allow?" Nancy's face tightened. The HOA currently has insufficient funds in the winter maintenance budget line to contract professional services. We're exploring options. Richard Stokes, the treasurer, looked like he wanted to crawl under his chair. Several people started talking at once. How much are we paying in annual dues? Mrs. Chen called out. Each household pays $1,200 annually, Richard said quietly. That's 120 households, someone else said. That's $144,000 a year. Where's the money going? Nancy raised her voice. The budget is available for review at any time. We have landscaping contracts, insurance, clubhouse maintenance, pool maintenance, legal fees. Legal fees for what? Tom interrupted. Various matters. Like towing people's trailers and fining them for helping their neighbors. The crowd rumbled with agreement. I could see Nancy's jaw working. If Mr. Lawson would like to contest his fines, he can file a formal appeal, Nancy said. But the covenants are clear. No commercial vehicles, no unauthorized maintenance. Then authorize him, David said, or hire someone. But do something, because if my wife had been hurt worse, or if someone else gets injured, people are going to sue. Are you threatening the HOA? I'm saying that the HOA has a responsibility to maintain safe conditions or allow residents to maintain them themselves. The meeting devolved into arguing for another hour. Nancy refused to budge. She wouldn't authorize me to salt the roads. She wouldn't withdraw the fines. And she said the HOA would explore options for professional snow removal, but couldn't promise anything before the next board meeting. I drove home that night feeling defeated. The temperature had dropped to 0 degrees and more freezing rain was forecast. The roads were getting worse by the hour. Day 3 of the polar vortex brought another development. I woke up to find my truck's windshield shattered. At first, I thought maybe the cold had caused it to crack, but there was a rock on my front seat surrounded by broken glass. Someone had thrown it through my window overnight. I called the police again. A different officer arrived, took a report, and asked if I had any enemies. Just my HOA president, I said. He looked at me sympathetically. HOA dispute, something like that. You'd be surprised how often we get calls like this. I'll file the report, but without cameras or witnesses, there's not much we can do. The windshield cost me $800 to replace, and I had to wait 2 days for the auto glass company to come out. In the meantime, I borrowed Tom's car to drive to work. Work was its own problem. I was a project manager for a construction company, and the weather had shut down all our sites. But I still had to go into the office for meetings and paperwork. The roads outside the subdivision were treated and manageable. Inside Meadowbrook Estates, they were a disaster. On day 5, someone broke their leg. Mrs. Henderson, the woman whose basement I'd helped pump out years ago, slipped on the ice walking to her car and fractured her femur. She was 73 years old. The ambulance had trouble getting up the hill to her house because the roads were so bad. I heard later that she was in surgery for 6 hours and would need months of physical therapy. That's when things started getting serious. Mrs. Henderson's daughter contacted a lawyer. On day 7, I got a phone call from an attorney named Michael Brennan. He explained that he was representing Mrs. Henderson and was considering a premises liability suit against the HOA for failing to maintain safe conditions. He wanted to know if I'd be willing to provide a statement about the HOA preventing me from salting the roads. Absolutely, I said. I should warn you, this might not make you popular with your HOA. That ship has sailed. I met with Michael Brennan the next day at a coffee shop in downtown Columbus. He was in his early 40s, sharp-dressed, and had the look of someone who'd done this kind of thing before. Here's the situation, he said, spreading documents across the table. The HOA has a duty to maintain common areas, which includes roads. They're collecting substantial fees from residents. They've prevented you from maintaining the roads yourself, and they haven't contracted professional services. That's negligence. Can they actually be held liable? Ohio law is pretty clear on this. HOAs have the same responsibilities as any property owner. If they fail to address a known hazard and someone gets injured, they're liable. The fact that they actively prevented you from addressing the hazard actually makes it worse. What happens now? We're filing suit against the HOA and against Nancy Whitmore personally as president. We're seeking damages for medical expenses, pain and suffering, and punitive damages for gross negligence. But here's where it gets interesting if we can show a pattern of reckless behavior. Other residents who have been injured or sustained property damage could join the suit. By day 9, 7 residents had joined the lawsuit. David Park's wife, Mrs. Chen, 3 other people who'd fallen and been injured, and one family whose teenage son had slid on the ice, crashed his car into a tree, and sustained a concussion. Nancy's response was to double down. She sent out a mass email to all residents stating that the legal action was frivolous and without merit, and that the HOA would vigorously defend against these baseless claims. She also increased my fines to $1,500 and put a lien notice on my property. That's when I hired my own lawyer. James Morrison was recommended by Michael Brennan. He specialized in HOA disputes and had a reputation for not backing down. He was a tall, thin man in his 50s who spoke quietly but with absolute confidence. "They can't lien your property for these fines," he said in our first meeting. "The fines themselves are invalid. You weren't violating any legitimate covenant." You'll notice that the covenant about commercial vehicles is meant to prevent people from parking work trucks or running businesses out of their homes. It doesn't apply to temporarily using a utility trailer for community benefit. So what do? We fight the fines, we file a counterclaim for the towing costs and your truck damage, and we join the premises liability suit. We're also going to demand an audit of the HOA finances because I'm curious where that money is actually going. The audit request lit a fire. Within 2 days of James filing the formal demand, Nancy called an emergency board meeting. It was posted with the minimum required notice, scheduled for a Tuesday evening at 6. I made sure to attend. So did about 80 other residents, which meant people were standing in the hallway outside the clubhouse, craning to hear. Nancy looked rattled for the first time since I'd known her. She sat at the head table with Richard and Patricia, and I noticed Richard had a folder about 3 inches thick in front of him. "This meeting has been called to address concerns about HOA finances," Nancy began. "I want to assure everyone that all funds have been properly managed and accounted for." "Then you won't mind sharing the accounting," Tom said from the front row. Richard cleared his throat. "I have prepared a summary of expenditures for the past fiscal year." What came out over the next hour was stunning. The HOA had indeed collected $144,000 in annual dues, but the expenditures were bizarre. Landscaping was contracted to a company called Whitmore Landscape Solutions, $20,000 annually. A quick Google search on my phone revealed that the company was registered to Nancy's brother. Legal fees were $35,000. When questioned, Nancy admitted this was primarily for covenant enforcement actions, in other words, sending violation notices and threatening homeowners. Pool maintenance was $18,000, which seemed high for a small community pool that was only open for months a year. There were dozens of line items that made little sense. By the time Richard finished, people were furious. You're basically funneling money to your family and wasting the rest on petty enforcement, David Park said, standing up. Meanwhile, we can't afford to salt the roads. All expenditures were approved by the board, Nancy said defensively. A board consisting of you and two people who are afraid to disagree with you, someone else called out. The meeting exploded into chaos. Multiple people called for Nancy's resignation. She refused. Patricia, the secretary, quietly said she was resigning from the board effective immediately. Richard looked like he might cry. By the end of the meeting, a petition was circulating to call for a special election to remove Nancy as president. Ohio law allows for this if 20% of homeowners sign. We had 50 signatures before people left the clubhouse. Day 12 brought more freezing rain and temperatures that didn't get above 8 degrees. The roads were now layered with over 2 inches of ice in places. Mail delivery had stopped because the Postal Service deemed the subdivision too dangerous. Emergency services put Meadowbrook Estates on a special advisory, meaning response times would be longer. I'd had enough. I took a personal day from work, loaded up my truck with salt, and spent the entire day spreading it on every road in the subdivision. I didn't care about fines anymore. People were getting hurt, the lawsuit was already filed, and Nancy had lost the support of the community. She had the tow company called, but this time, I was sitting in my truck. When the valley towing driver arrived, I explained the situation. He looked at the roads, looked at me, and shook his head. Lady called saying you were running an illegal business, but this looks like community service to me, he said. I'm not towing someone who's trying to keep people safe. She can find another company. Nancy apparently did find another company because 2 hours later, a different tow truck showed up. This driver was less sympathetic. I moved my truck and watched as they hooked up my trailer again from where it sat on the public road. Another $350 down the drain. But by then, I'd spread enough salt that the main roads were at least drivable. It wouldn't last more than a day or two with the ongoing freezing rain, but it was something. That evening, I got a call from James Morrison. We got the financial records from the audit. It's worse than we thought. How is that possible? Nancy has been systematically funneling HOA funds to companies owned by her family members for years. The landscaping company, the pool maintenance company, even the legal firm she's been using her cousin works there. We're talking about potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past 5 years. That's got to be illegal. It's fraud. I've already contacted the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office. They're opening an investigation. Day 14 was when everything came to a head. The prosecutor's office executed a search warrant on Nancy's home and HOA records. 3 investigators spent 6 hours at her house, carrying out boxes of documents. By that evening, news vans were parked outside the subdivision entrance. The story hit the local news that night. HOA president under investigation for fraud was the headline. They interviewed several residents, including Mrs. Henderson from her hospital bed. They showed footage of the icy roads. They mentioned my trailer being towed multiple times and the fines I'd accumulated. Public opinion turned decisively against Nancy. The news coverage framed it as a clear case of an HOA gone wrong petty tyranny combined with potential criminal activity, all while residents suffered through dangerous conditions. On day 15, Nancy resigned. She sent a terse email to all residents stating that she was stepping down to focus on personal matters, and that Richard would serve as interim president. Richard's first act was to suspend all pending fines and authorize immediate snow removal. I finally got to use my trailer properly. Over the next 3 days, I spread the remaining salt throughout the subdivision. Other residents came out to help. We treated every road, every intersection, every hill. The temperature had finally started to rise above freezing during the day, and with the salt, the ice began to break up. By day 18, the polar vortex had passed. The weather returned to normal Ohio winter conditions, cold but manageable. The roads in Meadowbrook Estates were clear for the first time in over 2 weeks, but the legal consequences were just beginning. The fraud investigation continued. Prosecutors discovered that Nancy had embezzled over $300,000 from the HOA over 5 years. Her brother, who owned the landscaping company, had been invoiced for work that was never performed. The same was true for the pool maintenance company. The legal fees were grossly inflated for simple violation notices. In March, Nancy Whitmore was formally charged with theft, fraud, and tampering with records. Her brother and the owners of the shell companies were charged as co-conspirators. The news coverage was extensive. The premises liability lawsuit against the HOA was settled in April. The HOA's insurance company agreed to pay all medical expenses and damages for the injured residents, totaling just over $200,000. As part of the settlement, the HOA was required to maintain a winter maintenance contract going forward and could never again prevent residents from performing emergency maintenance during hazardous conditions. My personal lawsuit over the fines and towing costs was settled separately. The HOA agreed to reimburse me for all expenses: the salt, the towing fees, the truck windshield, and the legal fees. The total came to about $12,000. They also issued a formal apology and thanked me for my service to the community. In May, Meadowbrook Estates held elections for a new HOA board. Tom was elected president. David Park became treasurer. They immediately implemented several changes, including transparent budgeting, public financial reports, and a community emergency response plan that designated me as the official winter road maintenance coordinator, with a budget of $10,000 annually. Nancy Whitmore's trial was held in August. The evidence was overwhelming. She was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA. Her brother received 2 years, suspended, and 5 years of probation. The following winter, I was ready. I had a new trailer, fully stocked with salt and the HOA's blessing. When the first snow came in December, I was out treating the roads within hours. Neighbors waved and thanked me. Kids drew thank you cards that their parents delivered to my mailbox. Mrs. Henderson, who'd spent months in physical therapy, had recovered most of her mobility. She invited me over for dinner one evening that December and thanked me for fighting against Nancy's tyranny. "You know what the worst part was," she said as we sat in her living room. "It wasn't the broken leg. It was feeling helpless while someone who was supposed to serve the community instead treated us like subjects in her little kingdom. At least it's over now. Thanks to you. You didn't back down, even when it cost you money and got you harassed." I thought about that drive to the impound lot on that freezing morning, about the rock through my windshield, about watching my neighbors slip and fall on ice that shouldn't have been there. I thought about Nancy's face when she blocked the road, so certain of her authority, so unconcerned about the consequences of her actions. "Someone had to," I said. The subdivision was different now. People were more involved, showing up to meetings, asking questions about budgets and contracts. The board was transparent, publishing minutes and financial reports online. We'd learned a hard lesson about what happens when a community lets one person accumulate too much unchecked power. On the anniversary of that first day when Nancy had my trailer towed, Tom organized a community appreciation dinner at the clubhouse. They gave me a plaque that read, "In recognition of service above self." It was a nice gesture, though I would have preferred they'd just let me salt the roads in the first place without the drama. But as I stood there with my neighbors, thinking about everything that had happened, I realized something important. The 2 weeks of icy roads had been miserable and dangerous. The legal battles had been stressful and expensive. But in the end, we'd reclaimed our community from someone who'd forgotten that an HOA is supposed to serve its residents, not rule them. Nancy Whitmore would serve her time and eventually be released, but she'd never have power over anyone again. The families she'd hurt had been compensated. The money she'd stolen had been recovered, and Meadowbrook Estates had learned to stand up for itself. That winter passed without incident. The roads stayed clear. No one got hurt. Emergency services had no trouble accessing the subdivision. It was exactly how it should have been all along. Sometimes I drive past Valley towing on Route 33 and think about that morning when I had to pay $350 to get my own trailer back. I think about the absurdity of being fined for trying to help people. I think about how close Nancy came to getting away with all of it. How if she'd just let me salt the roads, she might have continued her fraud for years more. In a strange way, her petty tyranny over a trailer full of salt was what brought down her entire corrupt operation. She was so focused on asserting control over something trivial that she drew attention to everything else. The prosecutor who handled the case told me later that they'd received dozens of tips about HOA corruption across Franklin County after Nancy's story made the news. Several other investigations were opened. Apparently, the problem was more widespread than anyone had realized. "You started something," he said. "People saw that they don't have to just accept it when their HOA acts illegally. I didn't set out to start anything. I just wanted to keep my neighbors safe during a dangerous winter storm. But I'm glad it turned out the way it did. These days, when winter weather rolls in, I check the forecast, load up the trailer, and head out to treat the roads. My phone usually rings with neighbors asking if I need help, offering to work a section of the subdivision, bringing coffee and gratitude. It's what a community should be. The plaque hangs in my garage, right next to where I park the trailer. Sometimes when I'm hooking it up for another salt run, I look at it and remember those 2 weeks when the road stayed icy because one person valued control over community. I remember the falls, the crashes, the broken bones, and the fear. And then I drive through the subdivision, spreading salt, making sure it never happens again. Because that's what neighbors do. That's what communities are supposed to be about. Not rules for the sake of rules, not power for the sake of power, but people helping each other through the difficult times. Nancy Whitmore tried to tow away more than just a trailer full of salt. She tried to tow away the idea that residents could act independently for the common good. She tried to enforce an interpretation of covenants that put procedure over safety, authority over common sense. But you can't tow away a community's spirit, not really. You can suppress it for a while, fine it, threaten it, make it expensive and difficult. But eventually, people remember that they are stronger together than any petty tyrant is alone. The ice melted. The winter passed. Justice was served. And every time it snows now, I'm out there with my trailer, doing what should have been simple all along, taking care of my neighbors and the place we all call home.